Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Movies in Black and White. I'm your host, Jacob Holmes, and you already know our co host, Raf Stitt,
That's
who
me.
was headed for a life of crime until I spotted him on the street and thought he would make a good podcast host. That's right, we're talking white savior movies today on the pod. Um, Raf, tell everybody about how I brought you out of the slums.
Yeah, well, I, like any other Black American, I was doomed for a life of crime and other misfortunes. But luckily, I had a benevolent white person in my corner who was able to save me from that life because, as we all know, the only way for Black people to make it in this country is to have a nice, friendly white person in their corner. So without you, I would be nothing. Um, I think that's kind of the gist of American life, as we see in all of these white savior movies. If real life is anything like these movies, then that's what it is.
And I mean, it goes both ways, Raf. I mean, you taught me that, you know, there are black people in this world that are do have value. Um,
I taught you how to not be racist by being one of the good ones.
with that, this episode. Obviously, white savior cinema is a big topic and an easy topic to slot in on a podcast about race in film. Not only is it prolific, it's also been well awarded and regarded at times, um, especially with a couple of examples that we're bringing today. But this is Raf's more episode. Raf really wanted to talk about how um, condescending these movies are, and all the awful things about why these movies need to stop being made, and why they suck, and that that makes sense. He's going to have a different perspective on that than I do, as a black individual. So, Raf, you can kind of take the floor.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. Yeah, so I mean, white savior movies, I wouldn't even say that I have a tricky relationship with this subgenre of movie. I do sort of believe that these are like among the most vile, disgusting things that are produced in Hollywood because they like reinforce so many untruths about our real world life and our real world struggles with racism and like race dynamics between Black Americans and white Americans. And I sort of hate everything that they stand for. I like to think that it's more than just like because I'm a Black American. I also like to think that part of it is because like I am a thinking person, and I assume anyone out there who's listening to this, and Jacob, you too, as like thinking people with like developed brains, we can all sort of come to the same conclusion of why these movies suck. So I guess this is going to be the conversation that we're going to have and explore throughout the course of this episode is why these movies suck. So I guess in order to get started, there are like a million trillion think pieces out there about how bad these movies are. And I just want to let everyone know that I read none of them because I don't want us to like sit here and regurgitate things that other people have said. I do want this to just be like an interesting sort of conversation, Jacob, between you and me about what it is about these movies that is so disgusting and awful and why we should stop making them. In order to frame the conversation, I think we'll be focusing on like one movie in particular and maybe two others that are also like pretty big examples of this, while also bringing up, a host of other movies because unfortunately there are way too many white savior movies that exist and we will, mention all of them and kind of the different things that they're doing. I think the big one and like the most glaringly bad example of these kinds of movies is The Blind Side, which is something that Jacob, both you and I are very familiar with. I think you've seen this movie, what, like two or three times?
I honestly can't even tell you how many times. I don't know. As a kid as a kid when this came out with a white conservative family in the football, South, I've probably seen this upwards of 5 times. Um, Not recently, but in those years. Um, and my thoughts on the film have evolved over those years. So
That yes. So okay, you've seen this movie like five times. I've seen it, I think, twice, and I also read the book that it's based on. I don't think we'll get into the book too much because like the movie is really the thing that we want to focus on.
yeah,
But The Blind Side does like represent everything that is wrong and bad about white savior movies, including the critical response, which will be like another topic of conversation that we're going to have. But two of the other big ones that I think we will touch on that are also really bad examples of this are The Help and Green Book, which, similar to The Blind Side, feature like all of the bad tropes and um, all of the bad tropes and like conventions of these kinds of movies, and also received way too much critical acclaim considering how dog shit they are as movies. Um, I guess we can start at the beginning with the OG White Savior movie, which is based on maybe not the OG White Savior book, but a very prominent White Savior book, and that is To Kill a Mockingbird. To Kill a Mockingbird is interesting because it's slightly different from a lot of these other white savior movies in that it's a first of all it's a legal white savior drama as opposed to like The Blind Side being sports. There are a whole other host of examples of other sports white savior movies, and then there's also like The Teacher white savior movie, which is another trope that we find again and again. But To Kill a Mockingbird is really interesting because, again, it's a legal story. It's like the legal white savior, and also um, it's different in that the black person who is being saved isn't this example of like the exceptional Negro, which in movies like The Blind Side, Green Book, Remember the Titans, Hidden Figures, things like that. Like it's often this exceptional Negro who is the one who is able to teach white people to not be racist, which again is something that we're going to circle back to. But to start us off, Jacob, have you seen To Kill a Mockingbird? What do you think of that as like setting up the sort of genre as we would come to know it all these years later?
so I have seen To Kill a Mockingbird live on stage at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival when I was in 5th or 6th grade. Um, so it's been quite a while. I've never read the book and never seen the film, which is bad for an Alabamian. It's like one of our most famous pieces of literature.
Yeah.
Um, and I meant to read it, uh, but it was actually, it's interesting. It was never required reading in my public school elementary or my Christian private school high school, which is a whole other can of worms. I think that would have been, an interesting piece of literature for Alabama students to be required to read, and it might be at a public high school level. I'm not sure. There's probably are classrooms that do that. Um, but yeah, I'm familiar with the gist of the narrative, and honestly, I had not really thought that much about it as a white savior narrative until today. Just looking at potential white savior films to talk about, I definitely understand. Like when I looked at it on the list, I'm like, well, yeah, that does make sense. I don't know
Mhm.
exactly how it plays out in the film, but I will circle back around to this. I don't want to get into this too early, but that will probably play into some of my devil's advocate um, role about white savior movies, at least ones like To Kill a Mockingbird and not The Blind Side, which has very few. I'm not gonna be taking a lot of devil's advocate, sides on the blind side in particular. Although I have a couple of statements to make that I can,
Mhm.
whether I agree with them fully or not, I can at least see a side to come from on that. But mostly, To Kill a Mockingbird will be a much stronger argument on that. But again, I don't know if I necessarily want to jump into that this early.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess we could jump into it this early because I think what is interesting about To Kill a Mockingbird versus some of the other examples that we have is one, the story is like fully centered around the white character in To Kill a Mockingbird. Like the black character who is being saved is sort of um they're sort of like a side he's sort of a side character. Like he's not really that crucial and central to the story. Whereas in things like The Blind Side, like the black character, even though they're maybe not the main character, is also a central figure in the story itself. And I think the second thing, which is probably where some of your devil's advocacy comes in, is that Atticus Finch is like such a righteous character. Um, Everything that he does like proves to us that he is a person of like high moral standing, which I think again becomes super interesting because like so many of the other movies within the genre that come later, I think like take that element of Atticus, like that sort of like not even self righteousness, but just like being like a righteous, just person, and like totally misses the point in terms of like how these characters are supposed to move to the world through the world, and like overly celebrates and is overly congratulatory towards white people just being like not the worst people in the world.
True. Okay. So,
So Atticus is like a good dude as opposed to like Sandra Bullock in The Blind Side is like just not a piece of shit.
yeah. So yeah, and it also bears before I get into that argument, something I meant to say is that it also bears to mention that the author, the writer of To Kill a Mockingbird, is a white woman in 1960 writing this. So especially for its time, certainly revolutionary in itself. Certainly, people don't look at To Kill a Mockingbird and think racist book. They think of a book in 1960 Alabama, that was very radical. And so then also, of course, Atticus Finch is, and you can talk about, this will it gets worse in different scenarios, I think, than this book, but um, yeah, it does revolve around Atticus Finch, and but it speaks to a white person using their power and privilege to represent somebody in a system where they lack the power to do that themselves. And so it's not, you know, it's a good example for white people of standing up and doing the right thing, and representing somebody who has that lack of power, in a way that challenged the narratives at the time. So, it's that's probably one of the examples of, technically it's a white savior movie, although my understanding is that it doesn't succeed.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, a white man trying to do as what's right for a black person, at a time when the white people around him were willing to just heap the trouble on the black man. And so, that's very different than what we get in movies like The Blind Side, um, which
The
is a whole can of worms.
the interesting thing about what you're saying there with like when To Kill a Mockingbird came out versus when The Blind Side came out, which I think it came out in like 2009, I want to say,
Yeah,
maybe 2007.
something like that.
So in when the original To Kill a Mockingbird film came out in like 62, I want to say. So right like you're saying, this is a time where cartoonishly racist white people like very much so existed in the world. Like we were still dealing with like the worst kinds of racism in real life. So having someone like Atticus Finch in fiction was super radical, pretty revolutionary in terms of like being able to fight against that system of like extreme racism. It made sense for the time. By the time we get to 2009, when The Blind Side comes out, we're a year into the first, or we're a year into Obama's presidency. Like, we are being sold this myth about living in like a post-racial society, and the kinds of stories that we're telling about black people and their relationship to white people and white people and their relationship to black people is still this super outdated 1960s style story about a white savior. And like, oh man, like, don't we pity black people? Like, they're also like, their lives are so sad and will amount to nothing unless like we do something for them, as opposed to like realizing that the Michael Orr character, you know, can do all of these great things, and like the Michael Orr person, like the real life person, was capable of all of these great things. Yes, it was super nice that like there was this friendly white family who helped him out, but like it reinforces this idea that like that is the only way for black people to do anything in the world. um and also it reinforces this idea that like in order for white people to want to like reach out to black people, like it has to be like the most, you have to be like the cream of the crop. Like, it's not just like, like any black person who they meet in their day-to-day life is worthy of, consideration, care, human decency. It has to be someone who exhibits these like amazing skills at football. Or in the Green Book, it has to be the Mahershala Ali character, who is like this like world-renowned, classically trained artist. Like, yes, those people are worthy of like not being racist towards, but so is every other black person. And it doesn't matter how many like medals or awards or whatever it is that they win. And I think these movies reinforce that, like, one, we are still living in this world of like terrible racism, which we were also told is no longer the case. And then two, that like you, only particular kinds of black people are worthy of white people's consideration.
Well, and to the Blind Side's credit, it attempts to paint the Tui family in a light where they just pick up this big black guy off the side of the road with no thoughts about whether he is talented at football.
Hmm.
Um, and to an extent, you could try and make an argument that, obviously, even in 2009 and all the years still today, there's been a lot of media slash just political narrative of black guys are predators, and especially the bigger the black guy is, the more predator he is. And so the family takes in this kid that a lot of white people would just like pass by and be like, "Ooh, no, he's too scary," and gives him a place to stay just out of the kindness of their hearts. And then they realize he's such a sweet, gentle kid, and that like their preconceptions, are so skewed, and then they like just treat him like their family. Of course, part of the problem with the Blind Side that makes the Blind Side particularly bad, in the movie, there's a subplot where the NCAA is investigating the Tui family for bringing this big, legendarily huge black kid into their home, where they happen to be Ole Miss boosters and funnel him to Ole Miss. And the movie's like, isn't this NCAA agent a bitch for like insinuating this? When in reality, the real life answer is probably exactly what happened. um, Michael Orr is notably on the outs with the Tui family, and
Hmm.
he says I think they profit off the movie. He doesn't have rights to the movie. He says they tricked him into certain adoption paperwork that gives them like all the profitability off of stuff. And it stands to reason that people who are involved in football, as much as the Tuies are, saw Michael Orr and saw a legendary framework if they could teach him football. But and also part of that too is a problem because they act like Michael Orr knew nothing about football before he came to them and was just this
Mhm.
big, gentle giant, which he might be a sweet guy, but Michael Orr says that portrayal of him is, way more infantilizing and than the real story, and, like, they portray him also. Another big problem is having to portray him as dumb,
Yeah.
because it's not enough to say that he's athletically gifted, they had to portray him as either dumb or stunted, and that they had to bring out his intelligence, It's not like he was just an intelligent kid already. They had to help him.
Yeah. The movie kinda suggests that this kid was doomed for failure if they hadn't been so kind as to, like, let him into their home. Um, and it it also, um it reinforces this idea that well, sorry, like you were saying, they at first they bring him in just like out of the kindness of their own homes, but like they don't really see him as a human who is worthy of their love and care until they realize that he's good at football. And I think like that is reinforced in the movie by all of their interactions with other black characters who are from the same neighborhood as Michael. And yes, like they live in really bad conditions, which is a truth for a lot of people within this country. But the idea that all of those other guys get written off as not being worthy of our time or consideration, but Michael is because we've discovered that he's good at football. To me, that is like as offensive as anything else that the movie is doing, because it again, going back to Green Book, it is only through Mahershala Ali's character being the most outrageously impressive person in the world that Viggo Mortensen's like, maybe black people aren't so bad. Like it can't just be like a normal black guy who does like normal shit in in their day to day. And I mean, we can bring in The Help at this point too, because that is a movie that is more so about like normal people in their normal lives who, you know, just through like being around white people, the white people learn like, oh, maybe, black people aren't so bad, this, that, and the other. And it doesn't necessarily go all the way to these black people have to be the most impressive in whatever field of work it is that they have, um, in order for white people to like care about them. But that's all kind of rambling. Have you seen The Help? So are you like aware or are you familiar with like any other movies where it's maybe we're maybe not so much having white people come around to not be racist towards black people because the black people that they encounter are so spectacular in whatever way, shape, or form it is?
So, I've not seen The Help, and I have not seen this other movie that I'm about to say, but it just came to mind, um, and I'm not sure how it fits with this conversation, but in terms of the exceptional Negro, as it's been
Hmm.
kind of called, trope, it seems like it's Hidden Figures in that vein, because it seems like it's on the one hand honoring these women who contributed so heavily to the space program, but also like you're important because you contributed to the space program only. Like, um,
Yeah.
you know,
So we can go through some of the examples of exceptional Negro trope. And again, I think these mostly fall into the sports white savior uh, sub genre. So in that you've got 42 about Jackie Robinson. You've got Glory Road about that Texas A&M or whatever Texas basketball team that was
El
like the
Paso, yeah,
first,
UTEP.
yeah, to have five black starters in like an NCAA basketball game. Um, to a lesser extent, you've got hardball. Hardball probably falls into the second category that we're going to talk about in a second. You've got Remember the Titans, which I know a lot of people love, but is a movie that I have some problems with. Um, and I think that's all that I have in terms of examples for right now. But
I have to walk back 1 second though, and I like Glory Road a good bit. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I will say, in many in many ways, that doesn't feel like so much like an exceptional Negro story as much as it is the realization that that black people can school white people in basketball.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. I mean, there definitely is that. Um, but I
anyway,
the issue with something like Glory Road is that again, the coach only starts to like see the humanity in these kids once he realizes that they can school white kids at
and
basketball.
I'd have to rewatch and see. I don't know. He seems to come in with a fairly open mind and not. He seems to be portrayed in the film as
Hmm.
someone who isn't so like they don't portray him being racist. So, for instance, I just watched the other night. I watched McFarland USA, which is a Disney film starring Kevin Costner as a white guy that is run out of his football coaching job because of an altercation and has to go to basically the worst, poorest town in America, one of the poorest towns in America, McFarland, USA, where there's a heavy, heavy immigrant population, and he becomes their track coach. And when he gets to McFarland, he's like, he goes in a restaurant, the diner there, and they're like, we have tacos and quesadillas and burritos. And he's like, you don't have a hamburger, you know, and like,
Yeah.
and like, they're looking around at the buildings and they're like, oh my god, I can't stay here with my white family. Um, but but then of course the movie goes from there and whatever, and it becomes a typical white savior sports flick. So I don't remember in Glory Road that being quite the case, but maybe that gets off track a little bit. I remember him
Yeah.
being a little more open.
So I think that introduces an interesting dichotomy, we'll say, in these kinds of movies where there's like the two kinds of arcs that we can have for white people is you have one, the white person who starts off racist, and then through meeting the exceptional Negro, they learn over time like, oh, okay, maybe black people aren't so bad. And then you have the Glory Road slash kind of like, I think the blind side is like somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. Glory Road, you have benevolent white person who, because of their benevolence, is able to lift up these black people who otherwise wouldn't be able to accomplish shit if it weren't for said benevolent white person. And I think the blind side, interestingly enough, sits in the middle of that, where it is like partially they're kind of racist and then learn to not be racist once they have this great football player in their home, but also they are able to like propel this poor black kid to bigger and better things that he wouldn't be able to accomplish on his own, because they were like the nice white people.
Yeah, and so I would argue too that so there may always be problems, especially on certain sides, no matter what, with a white savior type narrative. But for for basic white people out there, sometimes the best thing that they can come can handle is watching a white character go into a place where minorities are and learn they're just like you and me, and you know, and also the best, certain handle this better than others. Like the Blind Side doesn't do this well at all. I mean, she goes the one time basically and lives out like a white Karen wet dream of like I'm tougher than gangsters. Um,
Yeah.
they're scared of me. But like in McFarland, as an example, over time, it's like he gets a better sense for the community and like like he doesn't like for instance, he's not really like these guys are exceptional athletes and I can do something with them. It's more like, oh yeah, these guys are just really tough and they work way harder than I ever have in my life. And so, by understanding that about the community, like if we just direct that in the sport, like they could achieve a lot basically. And you know, it works for basic white people.
Yeah.
As an example, like look, I think McFarland the other night taught my stepfather what a quinceanera was. So like, simple little things of learning about other cultures, even if parts of the narrative are a little bit problematic, and why does it have to feature this
Yeah.
white guy coming in? But it's like white people from I don't think from a person with a minority watching the movie, I don't think it has much value, right? Um,
Hmm.
as much value, but for a white person that is struggling with their background, like a lot of people around me,
Hmm.
whose ancestors were just vile racist or subtle racist or still are subtle racists. um, very simple stories of a white person that they can identify with
Hmm.
going in and like finding community or finding family with minority people like can help chip away can help chip away at that. And so it's like even though the movie in most senses is really kind of bad and not really fair to the situation, I can still see some positive effects through that personal interaction.
I appreciate this sentiment because it's obviously something that is like very foreign to me, right? Like I watch these movies and for me, I'm like, this is super dumb. I have been told for most of my adult life that we live in a post racist society. So, like, therefore, we should make movies about race dynamics between black people and white people, or white people and whoever else they've been racist towards in a like slightly more sophisticated manner, in, not necessarily relying on tropes from like uber racist people from the 1940s through 1960s. Like the racism that is displayed in something like The Blind Side or even Green Book is just like so outrageous. And sure, maybe examples of that still occur today, but like as long as we like keep going back to it, we will just like reinforce that that is something that we're like okay with like being in our shared reality. um but I do appreciate, the idea that like maybe these kinds of movies can be exposure to people who otherwise don't have exposure to these kinds of communities, like your stepdad learning about what a quinceanera is. Like that's great. The thing that I fear is like what these movies are telling us about both white people and people of color. Like it still reinforces to white people that like we are the ones who hold like all of the agency, and everything that happens good to people of color is like through and because of us, as opposed to just like, no, people of color, like we also have our own agency and we do amazing, incredible, awesome things. And sometimes, yes, there are white people or other people of color along the way who help us reach those heights. Like we don't need white people in order to do it. And it also reinforces to white people that like these communities are so like down on their luck that that like we are the only ones who can do something about it. We're like, again, I appreciate that like all marginalized communities need allies, but how that allyship actually plays out is important. And white savior movies tell us that they have to operate in a very particular kind of way that I don't think is beneficial to either white people or black people in the long run.
Sure, and I think that if you're going to have something that qualifies as a white savior movie, really the only really proper way to do it is if the white character has to reckon with their privilege, and if they are going to help anybody from a minority class or help a group of minority people out of some kind of plight, they also have to reckon with what their involvement is or their ancestors, or the system that they're in and how that has um, contributed to that. I don't think it's fair to just be like, oh, these, yeah, I mean, because if a white person's going in, I mean, like, man, these black people, they just can't. They're just always gang banging, and they just need a white person to teach them how to live.
Yeah.
That's I mean, that's awful. I mean, and that's just ridiculous when, of course, white people all of it's rooted in slavery ultimately, because when you bring people here as property, then it creates a really hard path when you try and then lead them on a path to personhood, and all that that has entailed over these years. And so you have to reckon with all of those things. And a white person, if there's going to be a white savior, they need to have a really strong understanding of that. I want to ask because it
Which
was
is
it.
well, before you ask the question, I just want to say, to bring it back to The Blind Side, our favorite movie. I think that's another major sin of this movie is that the Tui family as characters, they never reckon with that their complicity in the systematic injustices that like lead to situations like Michael's and the other, members of his community who they end up encountering. Like they never once think about the fact that like they are very much so involved in keeping that system alive that like keeps people like Michael in the place that he's in. And it's not just through like their kindness in that single situation that will like do anything. Like, okay, sure, like you help this one kid out, but on a macro level you are very much so still contributing to the ills of society that lead to like the rest of like that. The last fucking scene of the movie, I just remember this now, is her reading the newspaper article about the other kid who could have been a great athlete, but he just didn't have any white people in his life, so he died in a fucking shootout. Like, that's insane. That is an insane message to send at the end of the movie. Like, Michael would have just been another one of these fucking, gangbangers in the hood who would have died by a straight bullet if I didn't come in and save him. Like, that's fucked up. And the movie, again, never reckons with that idea at all. That like they are very much so a part of the system of racism that exists within the country and in their community.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important. That's really what it needs to be at. I think there's definitely needs to be movies of, that inspire white people to identify with and ally themselves with the oppressed classes, races, black people. Um, Specifically, um, in terms of attacking the system, and not trying to pull a fish out of a barrel and say, "Well, this guy looks like he could play football." So
Yeah,
I'll help him.
this guy can play piano. I like
Um,
I like these two ladies because uh they, serve my family or whatever the hell happens in The Help. Or we like these ladies because they can do rocket science, you know?
right, like it's like helping. Well, helping one individual is good, and To Kill a Mockingbird is a case of trying to help one individual, but that's against the system.
Mhm.
It's standing against a system that seeks to hurt other black people like him. So, in terms of fighting an oppressive system, that's great. But in terms of, and the problem is, the ultimate problem is too, is that the white savior is getting the credit for just, I mean, it's really oh, isn't this such a nice, white people are so good. It's ultimately reinforcing, don't you feel good? Like you can be a really good white person. Look, white people can be really good towards black people. Um,
It's a very not all men ass genre of movie.
yeah, I mean, ultimately, The
It's
Blind
very
Side.
self-congratulatory. It's like
Yeah,
always, just like white people patting themselves on the back and like giving each other high fives for, again, doing like the bare minimum in terms of not being super racist. Not like we can, maybe do high fives and some congratulations when there's like real allyship that is presented and like actually um trying to like be part of systemic changes and like changing the way that we think and feel about um I keep saying we, but I'm speaking like for white people in this moment. The way that white people think and feel about black people, like that's when some high fives can go around. Um, for like realizing, oh, I shouldn't be racist because like the guy who I drove around for 3 hours is like, or for 3 weeks is like a kind of, he's like a pretty cool guy. Like that's the bare minimum. You don't get anything for that. You don't get a participation trophy for that, Vigo Mortensen. I'm sorry.
Well, and it may be annoying for me to keep bringing up movies I have not seen, but one that just came to mind was another potential problem that crosses a lot of white savior movies is um, Gran Torino. Just reading about it, um, I guess Clint Eastwood's character is basically racist and helps the one kid, but he also is helping him from a gang of the same race, and so it's like even though it's this white person helping a person out of a different race, it's also casting the same minority group as the villain, and so and kind of in a stereotypical manner. You know what I'm saying? Like same thing happens in McFarland USA. There's a scene where the white daughter has a great time at the quinceanera and then goes out with them for to cruise, and then there's like a I don't know, seemingly like a cartel interaction,
Mhm.
which may happen in real life. Like some of that stuff may happen, but you have it. It brings a kind of difficult thing when you're like when you're trying to say this community is really put down and like ignored and impoverished because of the way that they're treated in America, but also like these white people almost lost their daughter because of cartel. Like you, it's a tough balance to strike when you're also then like leaning into some of the demonization that you see all the time in the media.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, I think the issue is that they like lean into those portrayals of things that are very real in real life and, should be explored through cinema, but it's the fact that these movies take no time to like explore why it is that those things happen, why those realities are such for those communities. Um, it's not because Hispanic people and Black people wake up every day and we're just like, we want to go fucking gangbang. Like, we just want to go fucking like shoot each other up and deal drugs and smoke dope. Although, smoking pot sounds like kind of nice. I think everyone likes that. But, like these movies like reinforce this idea that, again, the system of racism has that like that's like just something that like Black people do, and it's not because there are years and years and generations upon generations of things in place that cause people to exist within those contexts in their life. Like it's not just a thing that happens because it fucking happens. Like there are reasons for it, and if you're not exploring it, then it continuously removes the appeal to people to like want to explore it, which is what we need to do in order to enact like any real sort of change in the world going forward.
help me identify if you can think of anything. I can't think of any cases where we get into white savior movies with black people that would quite hit this. But Avatar is obviously one of the most egregious examples of a white savior. Um, Even though I enjoy the movie to some degree for the visual effects, the story's pretty bad anyway.
Hmm.
But the there's not a problem with Sam Worthington's character coming into the Navi community and through this fantastical transformation lives in their shoes, right, and starts to understand that these people that they're treating like savages, whatever, are unique
Hmm.
cultural people. The problem is you can stop. I don't know what it is that like you can stop there and just be like, you don't have to have him suddenly able to ride the legendary, like the first person to ever ride the giant bird creature. Like that's a slap in the face to be like, we have this culture where we ride these birds, but you come in and you're the best ever, even though you're not naturally one of us. Like,
Yeah,
that's not necessary, and that's like a slap in the face. To for the white person to come in and be the best of the person at the culture. I don't know if there's a black version of that.
yeah. I don't know that there is. I think that that would be so much more obvious in a movie about black people, right? Like, I mean, I guess you could say like I don't know why this is the example that I'm thinking of, but like something like La La Land, where it's like we have this white guy who's saving jazz, but you do find that a lot with like movies about like indigenous cultures. So like Avatar, obviously Dances with Wolves. Also another like OG in the white savior narrative is Lawrence of Arabia, which I haven't seen, but is about a white dude who like rallies all of these Arabian folks to like rise up against the British Empire, which he is a part of, and then like also like Dune becomes something like that too, where it's this white guy who comes in and ends up being like the leader of this minority culture. I I don't know why it ends up being more passable, or like why white people think that it's more permissible for them to do it in those kinds of stories and like not do it in like something about black people. I guess because it happens so much in real life, like Elvis and like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin. Like that's just like a real life example of that shit happening. Um, but there's no like narrative film about it
Well, and
specifically.
it's because they don't stick around in that culture. It's they steal it or they take it to white culture. I guess if they were to be celebrated, it would. I mean, the narrative film version of that would be a white person coming into black community and becoming the best rapper alive, and then and but
Yeah,
also but it's just like black people adore him rather
Eight
than
Mile. Yeah,
rather than shifting over and becoming like introducing rap to white people, and then people are like, I love this white guy that invented rap.
yeah,
Uh, that. So another question though, this is we're getting to toward the end, and this is kind of so radio appeared on the list of white savior films, and I hadn't really thought that much about it. I remember enjoying radio. It's been a long time. Do you think that's I mean, to what level is that a white savior film to you? And because I can also see it as I mean, obviously there's the added factor that he's disabled.
yeah. Honestly, I don't know. I saw Radio in theaters when it first came out, and I think that was the first and last time that I saw that movie. And to be quite frank, it's not something that I have given a lot of thought to. I don't spend
Well,
a lot
I
of
was
my time thinking about radio.
I just think it's funny. As someone who's seen radio a couple times in their youth, um, I just don't. I mean, maybe I need to go back and look at it with fresh eyes. I mean, yes, the coach that comes in is white and radio is black and disabled, but the vibe of the movie is that like he's just kind of shunned and bullied for being disabled, and the white coach just kind of like likes him and doesn't think that should happen and just like lets him have a good time with the team. And so, so I just like
Yeah.
I don't really necessarily feel that. And it's like he's like, hey, you should treat this disabled guy better.
Well, it's not like explicitly a white savior movie, but it kind of just like inherently ends up being one based on the dynamics of like the characters within the story, which, again, like we can point to saying that we live in this post-racial society, but like it's a thing and like people notice it. People notice when someone is white, people notice when someone is black, people notice when someone
Yeah,
is
well,
Asian
and
or
that's
Hispanic or
true.
whatever. And like it informs a lot of how things within the world happen. And like it's true of movies too. If radio weren't played by Cuba Gooding Jr., like maybe there would have been a different reading, but you are like you are playing with people's understandings of the world when it is a movie that's starring Cuba Gooding Jr. as young Radio and whoever it was as the coach.
Um, is is Remember the Titans a Black Savior movie?
No, Remember the Titans kind of falls into the exceptional Negro white savior movie because as a coach and as football players, those people are only respected because of their abilities within their area of expertise. So the white town, right as the white saviors, is only able to accept the humanity of these people, including Coach Denzel Washington,
Because they're good at football.
because he's a good football coach.
Makes sense. Um, Other question is Django Unchained as another.
Django. Is that a white savior movie? I think it is, and I think that we need to have a separate discussion about Quentin Tarantino and his relationship to black characters and black audiences as a whole, because he sits in a very interesting place where I think that Django is in some ways playing with and toying with our understandings of white savior movies in order to tell one that I think is a bit more allied than something like The Blind Side wants us to think it is.
I'm excited about that conversation. So yeah, this has been a pretty good, wide ranging conversation on white savior movies. And I think this is going to lead us into um, a couple of. We're going to do a little three-part series here. That should be very interesting. And our next movie, I think our next episode that we've planned is what you called Hood Classics. Is that what we're looking at?
So we're doing that's what we're doing next. We're not doing Blackbusters next.
I think we're doing Hood Classics and then Blockbusters.
Amazing.
Um, and it should go without saying that I have not seen many, if any, Hood Classics, and that will be a part of the discussion when we return because that's part of the question is whether and how what would you expect of a white person to have seen these Hood Classics. Should they watch the Hood Classics? Whatever it is. So, um, Raph, always a pleasure to be able to sit down and record with you. Um,
Always a pleasure.
and
Great conversation.
I'm very much looking forward to these next episodes.
Me too. I can't wait. Um, More rambling from me. This is the type of rambling I've been waiting for my entire life.
Well, I will do my best to train you up and get you over that hill.
Yeah. The only reason that you're not racist anymore is because you realize that black people can be pretty good at podcasting.
That's it. That's it.